I'm supposed to be around people who don't share my beliefs, my values, and my goals. I should be around them so that I can point them to Jesus. Welcome to week 3 of our series on Samson. I hope you've been enjoying your time as a group discussing this and discussing life. I hope you've been getting to know each other a little bit, and I hope that your time together has made your lives look a little bit more like what Jesus wants them to look like. Today we're getting to the part of the story that's maybe the most well-known part of the Samson story, the story of Samson and Delilah. One of the great love stories of the Bible, right? It's a little bit of Michael Bolton's When a Man Loves a Woman, combined with Weird Al Yankovic's I've Got a Funny Feeling You Don't Love Me Anymore. Maybe it's a little bit more like the Righteous Brothers' Unchained melody, except for there's nothing righteous about this story, and Samson does end up in chains. So in all seriousness, this story is really a cautionary tale for us. It's a cautionary tale about who we choose to weave our lives together with. You know, Samson and Delilah is this story of two people who apparently shared some kind of physical attraction. But whatever that attraction was, they were certainly not on the same wavelength. You know, Samson, he loved Delilah. The Bible tells us that Samson loved Delilah, but Delilah loved money. What's fascinating to me as I read this story is that as the story goes on, they both grow more in love, but they drift further apart. You see, because what they're growing in love with is not each other. I think Samson grows deeper and deeper in love with the idea of Delilah. And at the same time, Delilah seems to grow more deeply and deeply in love with the idea of money from the Philistines. You know, as you read this story, you kind of want to scream at Samson, don't you? Samson, do you not see what's going on here? The first time he and Delilah have this conversation, and she says, Samson, how can I make you lose your strength? How can I tie you up and capture you? And he kind of messes around. He's like, well, you got to use the right kind of rope, and then I won't have any strength. And so she does it. And what's interesting is as you read the story, every time they do this, there are Philistines in the other room. Like there's Philistines hiding out, waiting to capture Samson. And you would think that the first time this happened, Samson would say, Delilah, maybe you're not the girl I thought you were. Maybe you're not the one for me. But he keeps coming back over and over again. And finally, the fourth time, he gives in to Delilah and he gives his secret to her. She cuts his hair, he loses his strength, and the Philistines capture him. He was too distracted by his love for Delilah, or maybe his love for the idea of Delilah, or maybe just his idea of what love was. He was so distracted by his desire for her that he couldn't see straight. Now, what I want you to understand about Samson is that Samson's greatest problem was not that he loved Delilah too much. His greatest problem was that he didn't love God enough. I think this is something that gets us in trouble sometimes too. Sometimes we may say, well, I want to avoid the love of the world, and I want to avoid the love of this or the love of that, or this distraction or that temptation. But the reality is the big problem is just that we don't love God enough. You see, when we don't love God, then it's very easy for distractions to pull us away from God. And when we find ourselves in that place, that's when we're most likely to fall in love with the things of the world or the things that will destroy us. That's why throughout the Bible, there's this principle God has for his people. Be careful about who you weave your life together with, because the wrong people will drag you away from him. Paul talked about this in 2 Corinthians. In 2 Corinthians 6:14, he said, do not be unequally yoked together with unbelievers. He's using this picture of oxen who share a yoke, right? There's two oxen, one yoke, and so wherever one goes, the other has to go. They can't go in separate directions. And Paul says, don't entangle yourself so closely with someone that you're forced to go where you don't want to go. Now, we often talk about this principle in terms of marriage, and we should, because if you're a follower of Jesus, you shouldn't marry someone who's not. They'll take you where you don't want to go. But this principle is about more than just marriage. It's about every relationship that we have. It might be about dating relationships. It might be about friendships. It might be about business partnerships. You see, the idea is I shouldn't entangle my life with people who will pull me away from God. Now, that's not to say I never spend time with them. We'll talk about that in a minute. But it means the deep connections, the deep commitments of my life ought to be with people who share my beliefs, who share my values, and who share my goals. Let's walk through those things real quickly. I should entangle my life with people who share my beliefs. People who believe in God, people who believe in Jesus, who believe that Jesus died and rose again as the sacrifice for our sin and as the gift of salvation. I ought to entangle myself most closely with people who share those beliefs, people who believe that the Bible is our main source of truth. I ought to entangle my life with people who share my values, right? There are people out there who don't have the same values of me. They don't value life the way I value life. They don't value love the way I value love. They don't value holiness or purity or righteousness. And if these are my core values, and I entangle my life with someone who doesn't share those values, I will eventually be pulled away from those values. So I ought to entangle my life with people who share my beliefs, who share my values, and also who share my goals. What are your goals in life? You know, if you entangle your life with someone who has different goals than you, you'll never reach those goals. If your goal is to be someone who is generous, who can give generously to others because God has given generously to you, make sure you entangle your life with people who share the goal of being generous. If your goal in life is to see more and more people come to know Jesus and be connected to Him, make sure you share your life with people who share that goal. Now, Samson's problem is he's entangling his life with a person who doesn't share his beliefs, who doesn't share his values, who doesn't share his goals, and as a result, his life gets off track. As a result, his life gets destroyed. You see, Samson, he was created by God to be the deliverer of Israel. And so his loyalty should have been to Israel. His loyalty should have been to God. His obedience should have been to God. But Delilah, she's just this border dweller. She lives between Israel and Philistia. And she's like, I'm just whoever the highest bidder is, that's where my loyalty goes. And because they shared different beliefs and because they shared different values and because they shared different ideas, Delilah pulled Samson in the wrong direction. Now, I know some of you may be thinking, but David, I have to be around those people. I mean, there are people in my family who don't share my beliefs, my values, my goals. Are you saying I should run away from them? You know, I have to work with people who don't share my beliefs and my values and goals. How do I work with, live with, be friends with, be neighbors with people who don't share this and still honor God? Well, there's a great guideline for us in 1 Peter chapter 2. In 1 Peter 2:11, Peter says that we are aliens and strangers. So we're living in a different world, but we are to live in such a way that we bring glory to God. And so the idea here is I'm supposed to be around people who don't share my beliefs, my values, and my goals. I should be around them so that I can point them to Jesus, so that the way I live makes them reconsider their idea about God. It's like what Jesus said about being the light of the world and the salt of the earth. I want to make everybody's life better so that they can experience the love of Jesus through me. Now, Paul wrote about this a little bit also in 1 Corinthians 7, where he talks about what do you do if you're married to someone who doesn't share your beliefs, your values, and your goals? Do you leave them? Paul says, no. If you find yourself married to someone who doesn't share this, then what you are to do is you are to live to honor God so that they will see your love for God, so that they will experience your love for them, and that may turn them towards God. And so that a couple who begins unequally yoked may eventually become equally yoked if through your testimony and through your life, your spouse comes to love Jesus like you do. You know, relationships can be sticky. Samson certainly learned that in his relationship with Delilah. Relationships can be sticky, especially when different people have different beliefs and different values and different goals. Following Jesus means we have to figure out, how can I honor God while living in this world? How can I have relationships with people who don't share my beliefs, values, and goals while not entangling my life with them? And that's your discussion today. So you're going to talk about how you can do that. You'll use the life of Samson as an example to not follow. And so as you go, lean into this conversation. Don't be afraid to participate. Listen well to the others in your group. You may be surprised what you can learn from them. And leave with an action step. Whether it's something big or something small, share it with your group so they can pray for you. And when they share theirs, make sure that you pray for them. And now, let's talk it out.